G'day people, I'm Sharyn and welcome. Today we're going to have a little chat about buttons and buttonholes, specifically the ones that I'm putting on my Quilt As You Go vest or waistcoat. If you're putting buttons and buttonholes onto the front of a garment, specifically something that has got the join down the centre front, what you're doing is bringing the centre front of this side of the garment and the centre front of this side of the garment together in the middle, one on top of the other. If you sewed it as a seam, then you would have a full front, so the buttons and buttonholes are taking the place of a seam. First thing to know, therefore, is that the buttons go on the centre front line of the underlap, and they usually get marked there, sometimes not. What you usually will find, however, is that the buttonholes get marked, and they're not marked to be in the middle of that centre front seam, and there's a reason for that. If the unbroken line is the edge of my garment and the broken line is the centre of the front of the garment, then I need my button to end up being here, right over that centre front when it's buttoned through the buttonhole. So how do I get that button to be in that position when I've made my buttonhole? The bar tack on this side has to come down further this way than the holes. It needs to be here, which means the buttonhole is going off there and the other bar tack is there. Where buttonholes go is not dependent on this, it's dependent on the centre front. And they need to be made somewhere around 3 millimetres, 1/8 of an inch, closer to the folded edge or the finished edge of the garment from that centre line. So this bit doesn't matter, this bit matters. The next thing to remember is the person who designed this pattern has worked out how big a button should fit between that centre line and the finished edge of the garment. If you go changing it very much, there is potential for you to end up with the button going out too far and getting too close to that edge. That's why patterns tell you use a 5/8 of an inch or a 1.3 centimetre or whatever. They will tell you what size button to use, and it is determined by how far they've allowed you from the centre front to where the garment edge finishes. You can change it, but if you change it, what you actually need to do is not change this bit, it's to move this around. And that's why most people don't really want to be doing those sorts of alterations. Pattern makers hopefully know the right formulae to use so that it will look right. Most of us don't know it. Similarly, if you go to a much smaller size of button, it's going to look odd because you end up with too much space between the edge of the button and where the fabric is. And you also usually then end up with that fabric curling up and it looks a bit weird. Back here again, finished edge of the garment, centre front of the garment, but this time doing a vertical buttonhole. Now you want your buttonhole to be on that line. If you're doing vertical buttons, and you really do need to if you're doing stretchy fabric, because horizontal buttonholes on stretchy fabric will grow as they get used. So vertical buttonholes work better for that. But make sure it's not with really big buttons, because what tends to happen with really big buttons is that the pressure, when the garment's being worn, will distort the buttonhole in that direction. And then you end up with things looking a bit weird as well. And that's why you tend to see that vertical buttonholes are associated with much smaller buttons. the kinds of things that you would see on shirts and blouses. Where you place your buttonholes on your garment, the patterns usually tell you where to do it. I like to make sure that I have got one at bust height, and that means that I won't get one of those stretched out gaps around my bust. By the way, those tend to mean that you've got a garment that's a bit too small for you. There shouldn't be that sort of a distortion around your buttons. I hope you've learned something today and it makes you a bit more confident about making garments and maybe moving things a little bit. Have a play with them. The most important thing you can do is practice things yourself. And I'll see you next time.